You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome, guests. We have a special treat today, a bonus episode of Hotel Pacifico. Just days ahead of the provincial election officially starting, we think, we're joined by Global TV's Richard Zussman, who has been introducing the 93 most interesting ridings via X, or Twitter, if you will, and giving his own take on what he finds the spiciest races are. We're going to drill down with Richard here today and disagree, agree, who knows. I'm joined here by the venerable Geoff Meggs as well, who will provide his institutional knowledge
young at heart,
and general wisdom that he brings. And we'll try to break it down. We're not going to go through all 93. I think we'll maybe take them in sections, and we're just going to fly at it. So, Richard, thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming to the Hotel Pacifico.
My pleasure. I know a lot about provincial ridings, but why I was nervous about doing this is I know there's one person for sure that knows more about the ridings than I do, and it's you, Mike. So
yeah.
I am excited to delve into some of this. I'm also a little bit nervous. I know you spent a lot of time in your career working through these things, and we'll get through this. 6 new ridings in the province. We have boundaries redrawn in more than 70 of them. We have new names. We have new candidates. We have independents. We have a legacy party gone from the ballot. So there's obviously a lot to go through, but I'm thrilled to be here, and I can't wait to talk about some ridings.
But Richard, is it fair to say that maybe in this election more than others, these riding by riding battles are going to be more critical?
Yeah, I think probably, Geoff. I think when you look at, for sure, when we have independents involved, it takes away some of that predictability we've seen in the past. The idea that a riding is a traditional NDP riding or a traditional BC Liberal riding that could be now called the traditional Conservative riding, a lot of that is gone. And we're also, the debate around this election is centered a lot on personalities. And yes, personalities always have something to play in politics. But in this case, there's so little known about what the Conservatives actually stand for that they're more saying, oh, well, we're just better than the other guy. And when you shape it up as one guy versus another, it opens room up, I think, for this idea that independents could come forward and say, look, you know me, I know the community. Send me to Victoria and I can have your voice represented there. So yeah, I think for sure. I think, yes, we always focus in on 20 ridings or so in BC that are the crucial ones that, the parties battle over. I think that's a longer list now. And Mike, we'll get into this. Mike may disagree, but my sense is we have 40, 45 interesting ridings. Not necessarily ones that are going to flip, but ones that are worth talking about really fascinating dynamics that are going to shape, who ends up winning this provincial election.
Okay. Well, let's just look at things regionally first. There's 93 ridings, as you noted. That's 6 more than the last cycle. By my count, there's 25 in the interior and north. There's 16 on the coast, if you count Vancouver Island and Powell River Sunshine Coast. So that leaves 52 ridings in the Lower Mainland, which is the real prize for the parties. Is who wins the Lower Mainland usually wins the election. Now, you brought up independents, and maybe we should start there. Let's just go through a quick list of MLAs that are running independent and some other key independent races. On my list, we've got the 2 Peace River ridings where Mike Bernier and Dan Davies are running as independents after multiple terms as BC Liberal/United MLAs. We've got Corley Oaks in Prince George Caribou, and I might be getting some of these names wrong. I can't remember if it's Caribou Prince George or Prince George Caribou. It used to be Caribou North.
Prince George Caribou. Prince George. There's 3 now Caribou that start with Prince George. It's okay. I'm only used to it because I'm putting it all alphabetically, and I keep searching for it as Caribou on the list, and then I have to scan down. So yeah, Prince George Caribou.
It's tough to keep pace with these names. Kootenay Rockies with Tom Shapitka. Now a new entrant who wasn't going to run again, but now she is, West Vancouver Capilano, Karen Kirkpatrick. Then we have Ladysmith Oceanside, which is the stupidest riding in British Columbia, the way they drew it up, I regret to say.
I have another one for the debate for stupidest riding, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, I've already taken a shot at this riding, so I can't do it in the mini bar again. Well, maybe I could. But that's Adam Walker, the former NDP MLA. And that riding connects Parksville with Ladysmith, but skips over Nanaimo. So they actually, have to drive around Nanaimo or boat around to get from one end to the other.
You
And
can
then you
also
get it.
drive through Nanaimo, Mike. That is
You
a
have to drive
possibility when it
through.
comes to Nanaimo.
Well, but then you'd have to drive through two ridings. It's just not right to have to drive through a riding to get to the other end of your ridings. It's not the way God intended it. And then there's some other, I'd say, significant independent candidates. I probably don't have all of them here, but I've got Vernon, where we've got the mayor of Lumbee, who was BC United candidate, running as independent against a conservative candidate, Dennis Giesbrecht, who comes from Kamloops, who was displaced from Kamloops because Peter Millivar became the conservative candidate. They bumped him to Vernon, and Vernon saying, "Who's this guy from Kamloops?" And by the way, it's an NDP riding.
I was about to say,
our
let the
listener
record
Sandu.
show. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what, we'll get into it. Then we got Shuswap and Kelowna ridings have independents. And then we got 2 independents from Richmond. So there's a lot going on. Which of all those, Richard, do you find the most interesting?
Yeah, so I think I'm working through the list and a few of those will be in the top 10. I think you have to start with the conversations around the incumbents because they are so well known. So you just look at the results, and yes, they were all running under the BC Liberal banner, the case of those first 5 that you mentioned, but they won these races by massive margins. Is that a conservative vote? Is that a vote for the candidate? I think most people believe it's a conservative vote, but we're talking about people who are legacy MLAs in these communities. Mike Bernier has served the people of Dawson Creek in some capacity for decades. Councillor, mayor, MLA, and he's asking for the people in his community to say, do you know what? Send me back here. It may not be under the BC Liberal banner or the Conservative banner, but I can represent you. I think that one could be the most challenging. I think philosophically in Dawson Creek, there's a real conservative feeling there. And Bernier has never really been the most conservative of conservatives. So that one to me, although Mike Bernier is interesting, is the toughest, I think, for the incumbents. Dan Davies, fascinating one, Fort St. John, again, won by huge margins. It's going to be curious what happens here with the NDP because this is going to be a one-on-one race between the independent and the conservatives.
Yeah.
The NDP decides to say, you know what? Maybe vote for Dan Davies in this riding. Maybe vote for Mike Bernier in his riding. That could help. Those are interesting. And then I really, the Tom Shapitka one to me is interesting because of the role of the NDP there, right? The NDP has won this riding before. In the 90s, they won this riding. And Sam Atwell is the NDP candidate there. Pete Davis wouldn't move out of the way for Tom Shapitka. And now they're going up against each other. I spoke to Shapitka this week and he's like, I'm getting people coming with checks, with donations, saying they want to help, volunteers, people willing to put up signs, all the stuff you need, because independents are at a disadvantage here, right? They don't have the same rules when it comes to fundraising. We saw this ruling from Elections BC basically telling all the former United candidates, you're not allowed to use your office space, you're not allowed to use your headshots, you're not allowed to use your signs unless you pay United for it. In essence, they're paying for it twice because they raised the money once, bought the signs, now they have to buy them off United. And
let's give them a break. Yeah.
It's wild. And I think Elections BC could have looked at this and said, well, why not just give these candidates a break? Because I wonder if they'll get the money back. So
but this was never about giving them a break. It was about crushing them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's being done.
Well, that's Elections BC rules, though, right?
It's Elections BC rule. And I don't believe Elections BC wants to crush anyone, but I also believe that there was no passionate plea to say to Elections BC, treat this differently. Like this is literally like nothing we've ever seen before. So in essence, let these guys use their signs. They can buy them back, sure, but it's going to be challenging. So, all of them, Mike. Honestly, when you narrow it in, all of them are interesting because.
Hey, Jeff, which one of the independents do you think is the most interesting?
Well, I want to first of all, context thing for watchers is that all 3 of us are looking to one side and down and so forth. That's because we're trying to keep notes and and I'm trying to keep up with Mike's detailed knowledge of everything and Richard's long study of this whole issue. However, on the independent front, I would say from an NDP standpoint, a lot of this doesn't matter because, as Richard has pointed out, there were massive majorities there for right-wing candidates. So this is not going to change the tally in David Eby's corner, except in places like the Kootenays and Vernon, which it becomes interesting. talk briefly about Ladysmith, which I agree is a bizarre outcome, but people may not be aware that in the redistribution that was just done, and David Eby, as Attorney General, helped draft the terms of reference for the entire independent panel. A special condition was removed that had been there in the previous redistribution that would have protected rural seats. So this redistribution produced a more equal number of voters in each riding, and that had the impact of reducing the number of rural seats. So it's
No,
critical.
Jeff, I disagree.
You disagree? Okay.
They protected the northern ridings.
Eventually,
Who did?
yeah.
And
okay. So the redistribution did,
well,
but it wasn't in the terms of reference.
I think we expected that. And I think we expected the rural ridings were going to be reduced. And what they actually did, in fact, was protect them and create an even bigger disparity on population. Professor Ken Carty, emeritus from UBC, who's been on many electoral commissions, would probably point that out, the disparity between BC's ridings and other jurisdictions.
Okay, that wasn't my perception. So
I think they allowed that to happen, and then the commission went a different way.
Yeah, and there was, I had to listen into some of those commission conversations, and there was a serious talk around cutting some of those ridings in the north. They ended up being protected, although we did add, in essence, 6 urban ridings, 4 in Metro, 1 in Kelowna, and 1 in Langford. But it is strange how they've carved these things up. Like the other one that stands out to me is Wanda-Fuka Malahat, because again, you take Duncan, which is close to Shawnigan, and you add Soup, which is on the other side. The riding is connected by a 200-kilometer forest. Like, so it's yes, I think Geoff is right that there was some strange things that unfolded here, but yeah, I think it's really led to that value as you described, Geoff, for the NDP and these independents in those ridings. So the Vernon Lumbee one obviously is a big one, and then this Kootenay Rockies one, and then obviously they need to hold on to this Ladysmith Oceanside, and it's now carved up where Adam Walker is in essence the Green candidate there now. I've been told, don't expect a Green candidate in that riding. They are going to endorse Adam Walker, and they didn't have a choice, is my understanding. Adam got all their volunteers, and so they had to throw up the white flag and say, fine. But that's going to be an interesting dynamic. He won as a New Democrat. Now he's trying to win as an independent in a strangely drawn riding.
Walker's from the Parksville end of the riding.
Yeah.
And the NDP candidate is from Cedar, from the southern end of the riding.
Yeah, Stephanie.
Then the Conservative is a relative unknown. And a municipal politician from Oceanside gave me the lowdown on this riding last night. So it's unpredictable. It normally would be an NDP seat, I think, everything being equal, but the Adam Walker factor does make it a little stranger.
Adam only scraped in, and David Eby threw him out of caucus for a misdemeanor, which has never really been explained, but was, I think the premier said was not sexual wrongdoing or corruption. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. He wound up as an independent, but he barely expected to win last time. It was always a tough seat. Now it's not even the same seat. But Richard raises a point I'd be interested to get your reaction to, Mike, which is the volunteers. So we had a 2017 election, the last one, where there was really a full-on effort with door knocking and everything. Then a pandemic election. We've seen, at least my impression, is a declining ability to get volunteers right across the political spectrum. And now we've had this gap. And in some of these ridings, you've got people who said, yeah, I've always been out there for so-and-so. I'm not a partisan person, but I really liked him because I bought a car from him or whatever it was. Now being told to saddle up for someone entirely differently, and the battle over whether you even get your signs and so on. Isn't it possible that in a lot of these ridings, the Conservative candidate, newly minted, will have a hell of a time going to people who already contributed once to the BC Liberals to get more money? I mean, I think it's going to be a bit of a gong show in some of those ridings, but it may not change the outcome from the NDP standpoint.
Yeah, my personal view is that if the support is there for the Conservatives writ large, they'll get pushed on a wave of sorts, right?
Yeah.
But where it gets down to a game of inches and ground games matter, it's probably advantage NDP, right? But just to round out the independent section of our discussion, I would say, if I were in the Conservative war room, I would be concerned about the fallout of the candidate movement and some ridings that probably should be in their column.
Yeah.
That may slip through their fingers because of, specifically Vernon would be number one on my list for that.
Vernon, yes.
And Steveston.
Well, and Steveston and Richmond Center.
Yeah.
Where
And they
there's,
all have the same trend, right? They're all
Yeah.
ridings the NDP picked up in 2020 that were surprises. They were places that the NDP had never won before, weren't expecting to win, and broke through. And those splits may help them get reelected. All of them have
and
the incumbents running.
the NDP squeaked in Richmond Center last time and
Yep.
won Steveston by a slim margin, in part too, because there were no Greens
Yeah.
in Richmond. And that was another factor, which the absence of Green candidates in certain places will make a difference. And unfortunately for the BC Liberals last election, they had two very strong candidates in Richmond who would have been great in terms of the renewal of the party,
Yeah.
Matt Pitcairn in particular, and Alexa Liu.
Yeah.
And they lost them, and that was very costly for them in terms of their lower mainland support.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting there because Jackie Lee is well known in circles for being an incredible fundraiser, but that
Yeah.
advantage is sort of gone now, right? The fundraising is over. You have to do the door-to-door engagement, but you know, you speak to Wendy Yuen in Richmond Center. She is an incredible organizer in terms of people at the doorsteps. Like she has a
Yeah.
big army behind her that is going to help get out the vote. They've identified a lot of vote. That's helpful. You know, you need data and politics in order to win. Those are the ones that the NDP is thinking, well, with these independents there, maybe we can hold on to this. Because I think a lot of us are thinking this is going to be a 2017
Yeah.
map, not a 2020 map with what we've
Yeah.
seen, the consolidation on the right. And
Yeah.
those are 2017 BC Liberal wins. And those are the ridings that ultimately will determine who wins this election.
So there's more conservative ridings that are at risk because of that. But we will note the Ladysmith Oceanside might be flip side, but not.
Yeah.
The
Not the
Research
same
Coast
degree.
poll yesterday had one just before we leave the Greens. As I understood it, I really read it very quickly, but it shows that Green supporters who are preparing to shift may be more likely to shift conservative than to the NDP. And the Greens have not benefited from the collapse of BC United at all, as far as I could tell from the poll. So it'll be very interesting to see. They could be spoilers in places like, even against Grace Laura, I think, in Victoria. But that's a very
We'll
safe
talk about that
NDP
one.
seat. Yeah.
Okay, well,
That's gonna be a
let's keep
fun
going.
one.
Let's
Case by
put the
case. All right.
independents in the rearview mirror here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna start up north here. I'm gonna pick out an interesting riding here in Stikine. Now this has been in the NDP column since 2009, I think. With Doug Donaldson. It was newly created from Bulkley Valley Stikine in 2009. It had been held by Dennis McKay and the BC Liberals. They took a smaller piece out of Bulkley Valley Stikine, made it its own riding. It's the smallest riding in the province by population. I think it's the largest by geography. And Nathan Cullens, the MLA, he won it handily last time. But the weird thing about it last time is that there was a BC Rural Party. Former Mayor Telqua got about 10% of the vote. And there's also the leader of the Christian Heritage Party who's running again, who always gets somewhere between 5 and 10% of the vote.
Right.
You mostly off the non-NDP side of the ledger, I would argue. So now you're switching David Eby for John Horgan, you're switching John Rustad for Andrew Wilkinson. You won't have the same vote split. Plus, I heard today that the Greens may run an Indigenous candidate who's active in the pipeline disputes up there. So stir that around. Maybe that's a horse race.
Yeah, and it's back to being called Bulkley Valley Stikine. And I talked to Nathan Cullen about this yesterday, and he said, bring it on. Bring it on. He has been elected there for a long, long time. But to the point we were making earlier around rural representation, this is a small riding when it comes to population, giant in size. So in essence, that means the votes count for more. You need to get fewer of them to win compared to a riding in Surrey, which has a much bigger population. It's harder to get to the voters, sure, but you need to be efficient. And I've heard this enter the conversation recently too, Mike, as being one of the ones that's interesting. The way it was described to me is it gets paired up with Skeena, because Skeena is one of those ridings that was won by the NDP in the past, but Ellis Ross has controlled it the last few times for the BC Liberals. And the sense I'm getting from people, Sarah Zimmerman is a great candidate, the terrace councillor for the NDP, that maybe this is in play for the NDP in an election where, you know, with things so close, we're not thinking they're going to gain a lot of seats. They're really about holding on to what they've got. This is one of the ones that they may gain. And I would expect we'll see David Eby there pretty early in the campaign cycle to say, look, this is one that we think we can pick up. At the same time, they're now saying, okay, but we have to figure out how to hold on to Bulkley Valley Stikine, because Nathan Cullen's a minister. He's well known in the community, but there's dynamics there, as you described, right? There's the Indigenous dynamic in the riding. There is the equity issue in Smithers that got described to me around rich neighborhoods and not so rich neighborhoods, and trying to engage with voters there. And turnout is going to be so crucial. So if this is a change election, if people want change, that is going to be one of the really interesting NDP strongholds that could be caught in a wave.
I think
Nathan's fine.
Yeah.
I think Nathan's fine, but there's another reason I want to
Geoff
raise.
Meggs' decision desk is just
yeah, no, well, I'd be very
reported in.
surprised. I mean, you know, he was an important recruit in 2020 when John Horgan, after a lot of searching, named him the candidate. That was one of he used an ability he had under the equity policy to put in Nathan, but he was an incumbent member of Parliament, knows the area intimately. But I would say this is something we need to watch across a number of ridings, which is the Indigenous vote. And if Indigenous voters are indifferent to a commitment by the Conservatives to rip up the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous peoples, that's really something. So I think that decision should trigger even more support for Nathan than would otherwise be the case.
Yeah, but on the flip side, Geoff, you've got Indigenous-led LNG project in Kitimat with the Haisla. You've got the Nisga'a leading LNG project and pipeline project. Both of those are in the Skeena riding.
Yeah.
And, you know, they may have concerns over what the various parties' agendas mean for their projects. Now,
Well,
the Cedar project's not going to change at this point, but there's more than one agenda going on, right?
Well, I don't think that there's an environmental vote up there in Indigenous communities that's large enough to turn back pipeline projects or upset an election.
No, I'm saying they're
They would have
pro
they're
those
pro of it. So,
opportunities, right?
but the NDP government's been approving these things.
Cedar, yeah.
Well, and LNG Canada won, or
but there are questions about
LNG.
certainty too. Communities are worried about certainty, and we know that. We know that there's concerns about investment decisions. So I think that's going to be a factor in these ridings. But it was interesting talking to Nathan Cullen. It really was the sense. This is a guy, like you said, Geoff. He was a big recruit. He is battle tested. He is known in that community, and he's a fighter. He is a political fighter.
Okay.
He likes the fight, and I think he's excited that his riding is being considered one to watch.
Okay, let's jump on the bus down to the Kootenays.
Yeah.
There's a riding at Kootenay Central, which used to be Nelson Creston.
Yep.
And I just want to flag it because the Greens always make a bit of a run there.
Yep.
The Conservatives will probably do better than the BC Liberals did before. In fact, did vote SOCRED way back in the day. But do you see, are the NDP going to have a horse race there, or are they pretty comfortable there, do you think?
I spoke to Brittany Anderson this week about this. You know, Nicole Charlwood is the Green candidate, a good candidate there. The Greens continue to search for that breakthrough off Vancouver Island. Yeah. And, you know, people like you and I, Mike, have long circled the community. You know, the riding formerly known as Nelson Creston and West Vancouver Sea to Sky is the places where they could have their breakthrough. So if there is a sentiment around the Greens, and we haven't seen it yet with the polling, right? They're way down in the polls. But if we start seeing an uptick in that polls around, you know, environmentally conscious voters, and maybe Sonia First Now has a great debate performance, then this is one of the ridings that comes into question. But Brittany Anderson has come to Victoria, again, a 2020 recruit, replacing Michelle Mungal. She's done the work. She's represented her community. And you see her working around at a place like here at UBCM. She is bringing around the councillors and mayors from her riding and introducing them to ministers. Like, she is doing that work. So yes, if there is a Green wave of any regard, if they bump themselves up in the polls, this becomes in play. If we don't see a lot of movement, and I don't think any of us expect, we'll see. A lot of things can happen in an election, obviously, but with, you know, those two clear parties fighting over in a close election, I have a hard time believing we'll see that Green upswing. But if we do, this is the riding among a few others that we'd have to watch.
Well, let's just, well, Geoff, do you want to weigh in on the Kootenays, or?
No, I agree with what Richard said. I agree with what Richard said.
Well, let's hop over to West Van Sea to Sky, since you mentioned it, and just tie up the Green conversation on the mainland. You've got a really interesting three-way race
Oh, it's amazing.
between Jeremy Valleroot, I think.
Vallieret.
Thank you. From the Greens, who just lost by a whisper to Jordan Sturdy last election. You've got Jen Ford from Whistler, councillor, former head of the UBCM. And you got Yuri Fulmer, noted businessman, philanthropist, chancellor of Capilano University. Now, this riding is about maybe half, a little less than half of West Van, which isn't that big. Bowen Island, Lions Bay, Squamish, Whistler, Pemberton. So a lot of it is sea to sky corridor, most of it.
Yeah, it is to me one of the most interesting. It was the closest riding in the province last time around. It only got settled after they counted all the mail-in ballots. On election night, Jeremy Vallieret had won it. He's running again. Jen Ford is a big recruit for David Eby and the NDP, well known in provincial circles through her work at UBCM, also well known in Whistler. But as you describe, Mike, like the challenge is around how the riding breaks down. So Yuri Fulmer is from West Vancouver. That's where he's going to be counting on the votes. And then as you work your way up through Horseshoe Bay and up the highway, where do you start picking up these seats or the votes? And the crucial part to me here will be Squamish. So there's a lot of debate about what is Squamish anymore. A lot of people call it a bedroom community to Metro Vancouver now. Could also be described as an outdoor paradise for those who want to get out of the grind of the big city. But are the demographics closer to like a Langley, or are they closer to a Salt Spring Island? And that's, I think, what we're trying to figure out is as people move into that community from other places in Metro Vancouver, are those largely young families that are coming from the suburbs of Metro Vancouver who care about those core issues the NDP has championed since they've been in government? And that's going to be the key for Jen Ford here. Like, this has been a multi-party race a bunch of times. All three candidates are really, really good. And it's one of these ones that is unpredictable because of where these candidates line up sort of regionally in that riding.
What do you think, Geoff?
Well, I think it's one of those strange things that's true about the Green Party, which is that they tend to have their bastions in well-to-do areas where people feel free to make kind of a rebellious statement and don't go with the two mainline parties. And you see that in Ontario and elsewhere. So this could be a place, but it would be, and there's often been self-identified Green Party members who were mayor of Whistler, for example. So, you know, I don't rule it out. However, I think the bedroom community, and this is just anecdotal, is really made up of core NDP voters in lots of ways, healthcare workers who are commuting to Lionsgate, people who are working in the trades, who may be flying different places to work, that kind of stuff. So they're generally better off that they've moved there for housing reasons. And if that audience is lost by the NDP, then anything could be the outcome, because that's a crucial audience everywhere. So
I'm gonna
I agree, one to watch.
I'm gonna say Advantage Greens, because I think one of the maybe secret sauce for the Greens this time is that some of that federal Liberal vote, which is pretty strong in that area, may go Green, because they're not going to go Conservative, just enough. And the candidate's been working hard for the last 4 years too. So
and people
don't
know
like the Conservative.
It'll be interesting.
They'll be that unhappy with the Conservative, Mike.
No, and that piece is going to be interesting too, because Yuri Fulmer, when they announced him as the candidate, I think for a lot of people, it was an eye-opener that, look, the Conservatives are attracting real candidates now. Like, it was a big shift to me around some of these lifelong sort of conservative supporters for a dormant party. Yuri Fulmer's different. And this is one that I think, again, if things shake out and John Rustad becomes the Premier of British Columbia, this is a guy that immediately goes into cabinet. He may even be a finance minister. So you need these people around the table to build out your cabinet and expect a lot of time spent there from the Conservatives for that reason.
They'll need a bit of a wave behind them, I think.
We're going to use this space this week to report on a growing problem guess that poses a real and present danger. The issue is copper theft. And I want to talk about it not only on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS, who quite obviously has a vested interest in all of this, but also as a public service message. Here's what's happening out there. Because of the rising price of the metal, more and more thieves are targeting copper wiring and other copper components from utility poles, substations, and construction sites. Then they resell it. That causes widespread havoc. Just imagine for a moment. You're at home and your loved one starts experiencing a sharp pain in their chest. You pick up the landline, no dial tone. You rush for your cell phone thinking you'll have service, but there isn't any. And it's not just 911 services that can go dark from copper theft. A lack of connection can stop your business dead in its tracks or even delay submitting your homework assignment on time. This, of course, leads to costly repairs to the infrastructure, broader power outages, which compromises our emergency services and creates dangerous conditions for utility workers and the public, and an economic burden that extends beyond the price of repair. There are opportunity costs that impact local economies as well as increased operating costs. So, pretty clear it's a serious problem, one that requires a multifaceted, collaborative approach to address effectively. From a public point of view, be vigilant in a common sense way. If you see suspicious activity around areas with copper infrastructure, report it to authorities. Do not confront thieves directly, and talk to others about how copper theft impacts public safety and infrastructure. From a policy point of view, strengthened legislation is going to help mitigate the issue. From a TELUS point of view, they're investing in increased drone surveillance and predictive software, other measures too. And they thank you, guests, for listening.
So let's go across the Lions Gate Bridge here. And the city of Vancouver, do you see any races that are interesting in the city of Vancouver?
Sure do.
Okay.
Where I'm
Okay.
sitting right now. Vancouver Yaletown to me is one of the key ones. And this is,
Okay.
you know, in politics, you guys know this well, right? You guys are big brains in politics. You think about big strategies, and then you realize the voter sometimes just feels something in their gut. They just say to themselves, you know what? I don't like what life feels like. So if you're walking out of your $1 million Yaletown apartment and you see somebody
$2
peeing on the side
million.
of your building, $3 million, $4 million, you see somebody sleeping in the entryway or peeing on the side of your building, you say to yourself, I don't like this. And you think to yourself, who's to blame? I already blamed Kennedy Stewart. He's gone. Now I blame David Eby and the NDP. And I say, you know what? I'm going to vote Conservative because I'm frustrated with what the world looks like to me. Melissa DeGenova, former city councillor, people in Vancouver have voted for her before. Terry Young, big recruit for the NDP. Wife is a city councilor right now, Sarah Kirby Young.
ABC.
It is this weird political dynamic. He supported Stephen Harper. He was a Conservative at one point. Now he's a new Democratic candidate.
There was some disquiet in the NDP about the Terry Young
for
nomination.
sure there was. For sure. And there still is. And there was frustration from Jeanette Ash that she didn't feel it was a fair fight. Fine. That's over now. These are the two candidates on the ballot. And I feel this becomes a top 10 most interesting riding. So also, we talked about redrawing boundaries. This one, to me, again, we don't have great data on this, but my understanding is if you took the 2024 maps and used the 2020 results, this is a riding the BC Liberals would have won. And Brenda Bailey looked at her options. So she represents this area now, but based on the carve-outs, she looked at it and said, well, I have a much better chance in Vancouver South Granville on the other side of the bridge than I do in Yaletown. So she moved over there and Yaletown was left open because it's going to be a real challenge. And the other thing, you guys know this campaigning, and I hear this a lot from people when we talk about this riding, accessing apartment buildings is hard. Like when you have detached homes, door knockers can go door to door to door. They can get ID their vote. They can interact with voters. All these buildings have secured front doors, and not just that, secured floors. So if somehow you have a volunteer who lives on the 7th floor of a building, you used to be able to, in some of these older buildings, get in the building, you guys know this, and work your way all the way up because you had you got invited in as a guest. Now, with all the floors locked down, you can't do that anymore. So getting to the voter is harder.
Yeah, Sam Sullivan would locate himself at the entryway to Strata buildings and just
he was the king of this, and he would always bring a dog with him, and people would come say hi to the dog. And when they'd start petting the dog, Sam would say, "Oh, hey, how are you? I'm your local candidate." He is the king of dialogue with people in this area because it's a different type of strategy compared to.
What do you think about Yaletown, Jeff?
Well, I agree with what's been said. I mean, Sam was highly visible because he had been on council for years, had been the mayor, and traveled everywhere around the riding in his wheelchair, very highly visible and engaging person. So he had a good start. But when the riding was created, it was very difficult. Matt Toner started to grow the NDP vote in there and then went off to the Green Party, which is sort of a sign of how much people do drift around in that riding politically. But I think this is going to be a tough one. What happened in the redistribution is that the area where I'm sitting, which is more NDP on the south side of Falls Creek, was lopped off and put into this new riding, which now Brenda Bailey's going to contest. I think she'll be successful here. But it left Yaletown more winnable, as you say, Richard, by a right-wing option. So Terry Young is a good response to that. Long history of community involvement in the Chinese Canadian community, but also as senior person in the Vancouver Police Department until he took a leave to do this. So it'll be very interesting. But I agree with your last comment. It's brutal campaigning down there because the usual door knocking solutions just aren't available. There isn't. Nobody lives in anything under 10 stories, basically.
Vancouver's got, I think, 12 seats, and I mean, Yaletown, okay, potentially conservative, and Quilchena, it seems like it would go conservative absent a strong independent kind of moderate liberal who's got the gravitas to pull it off. But I'm not sure I see any other conservative seats in Vancouver. I mean, I think they could compete in Fraserview maybe.
Yeah.
But Langara, Michael Lee barely won last time, and with David Eby being from Vancouver, I think that helps the NDP, and I don't think the Conservative candidate lines up well with the race there. So I feel like Langara would be, if I were an NDP strategist, I'd have that one circled as a pickup.
Well, I think
and that's one.
The challenge for the NDP there, I think, is that we just saw today, I think it was Jamie Stein, who had been the BC United candidate there. I think fairly prominent member of the Jewish community. And Michael Lee was very, very strong on that question, particularly in support of Selena Robinson when she wound up leaving the caucus or being thrown out over the controversy over Gaza and the Hamas attacks. So there may be an opportunity there for the Conservatives, given that Michael Lee's now gone. Jamie Stein's no longer there. This will be a tough one for the
candidate. Clear path, but it's still, I think, a tough path for the Conservatives, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's head into the other great city of the Lower Mainland, Surrey.
Yeah.
Where we've got 10 seats, a lot of movement. So, okay. Yeah. Eleanor Sturko is the MLA for Surrey South, but she's crossed the floor and went to Cloverdale. Then Trevor Halford is the MLA for Surrey White Rock, and there was a Conservative candidate. And then when they did the deal, who was going to go to Panorama? Well, after some mud wrestling, it turned out to be the Conservative candidate going to Panorama, which displaced the current Conservative candidate who's now running there as an independent. Yeah. Meanwhile, the former mayor of Surrey is running in Surrey Serpentine, which is the best named riding in British Columbia, in my opinion.
Well, you've got to pronounce it right then, Mike.
Surrey Serpentine River.
Serpentine. I asked the mayor, because I will do a pronunciation guide for Global for election night. This is one of the shticks that I do, and this is the one I was so confused on. I had heard it both ways. It's one of these things that people that live in the neighborhood, some of them pronounce it Serpentine, some Serpentine, but I got it from Brenda Locke. It's Serpentine. And it's Baltej. I know you haven't done that one yet, but Baltej Singh Dillon, and I'll let you finish it because I can't wait to get into the Surrey ride.
Well, I've gone into. I think I've exhausted myself. Well, I should also add that in Surrey South, the Conservative who is the candidate there, he is the husband of the member of Parliament, Carrie Lynn Finley. So, anyways, a lot's been going on in Surrey. It's a big prize. It's 10 seats. There's a lot of bullishness among the Conservatives that they can win Surrey. I've been asking people at EBCM, like, what do you think in Surrey? And I get different answers. Some people say the NDP will win. Some people say the Conservatives will win. So I don't know. Which race stands out to you, Richard, is the one you're most excited about?
Cloverdale and Serpentine. Cloverdale is one of two ridings in the province where you have two incumbents. Victoria Beacon Hill's the other one. So you have Eleanor Sturko there as an incumbent from Surrey South moving over, and Mike Starchuk won that riding last time around. It was a big prize for them. That was a big win. Former Kevin Falcon seat a long time ago. So these are the ones that I'm focused in on. Demographics are important there, but just overall, Surrey politics is different than other politics. A lot of it is waged on Indo-Canadian radio, Punjabi radio stations. A lot of it is debated in Gurdwaras. Like, there is a politics that happens there that is unique to anywhere else in the province. And there is a sense from voters, especially in the Indo communities, that they want to hear from these parties, and organizers matter. And that's one of the things I wonder about the Conservatives is they're saying, yes, we've built up our organization and we have more organizers, but they're still lacking the on the ground organizers the NDP has built up from 7 years in power, that the BC Liberals had in spades, right? They had people in all the communities, all the Gurdwaras. They understood those neighborhoods extremely well, and the Conservatives still are playing catch up on that. So just overall in Surrey, that's interesting to me. You start with Serpentine and Cloverdale, but if the Conservatives are going to win this, they need to grow from there. They need to break through in Fleetwood, Guildford, Panorama, with the understanding that Conservatives will likely win Surrey South and Surrey White Rock, but they need to build on those ones. Again, we're looking back to the 2013, 2017 maps here, where the BC Liberals had success in Fleetwood and Guildford and Panorama, or Panorama was the new riding back then, but the other two, Guildford and Fleetwood, like these are places where the Conservatives need to pick up to be part of the conversation of a majority government. They're one of the ones that are sort of border, or they musts, close, but they're for sure like, we need to be in this. We need to be in this conversation. But Serpentine is interesting for the fact it's new, but really the candidates, like Linda Hepner, former mayor of Surrey. Yeah, she's been out of the public spotlight for a little bit, but she is a substantial candidate here. And then Voltaire Singh Dillon, a groundbreaking former RCMP officer. The story's well known. First RCMP officer in the country to wear a turban on the job. You know, his advocacy on that changed the way in which the uniform was treated in this country. I've heard really interesting stories about him on the doorsteps. This ability to diffuse a situation. You run into a voter, not so happy to see you, maybe frustrated with the hospital, maybe frustrated with crime and public safety or cost of living, but he has an ability to engage with people. And I'm being told, you know, yes, it's from New Democrats because they're the ones with him, but the sense I'm getting is he has an ability to flip votes at the doorstep, and that's hard as a candidate in this day and age.
I agree that it's a battleground for sure.
The South Asian population in Panorama, Newton, Surrey,
Serpentine,
Fleetwood is substantial, and Delta North too, frankly.
Yes. And Surrey North and Surrey Newton, but those swings, it's huge. Like I have some of the demographics here. In some cases, the population is 80% plus not white. And we see that in the Richmond ridings too, but it changes. It changes the media that they consume. It changes the conversations they're having around community. And so that is a different factor in terms of the way the candidates have to engage with these voters.
Yeah, I think for the Conservatives to win the election, they've got to win Surrey, you know, and
yes.
I think they'd have to take 6 out of 10 there. And, you know, as you've outlined, it kind of starts from the south and pushes up and around the Langley boundary where they've got the opportunity there. So, you know, I think they know where they have to win. You know, unless something really crazy is going on, and not crazy, but something material is happening in the South Asian community that's changing, like it's done in the past, where the mix of issues just make them go with their feet one direction or the other.
Right.
You know, I would think Delta North would probably still be secure for the NDP unless something's happening in the South Asian community.
And I think part of that's Ravi Kahlon, right? He is extremely well liked, works very hard. Just to go through those numbers on visible minorities, Surrey Newton 82.7%. Remember, the provincial average is 34%.
No Harry Baines this time.
Right. Surrey North, 79.9%. So that's Rashna Singh moving over there. Surrey City Center, no Bruce Ralston, but that's 74.8%. Panorama's 80.3%. So you can see, you know, you're engaging here. And then you look at the other ones, you look at White Rock, and that's down at 27%. So it's totally very different demos. Even Cloverdale's 43%. And so it's a much different story, and South is 47%. So it's a very different story depending on what ridings you're in Surrey, obviously around some of those demographic representation, largely Indo communities.
Well, it's a very demanding place to campaign because no matter, you know, what the government does, including break loose and put in a lot of money for the hospital and so forth, there's always some new demand, which becomes a clamor in the South Asian media and elsewhere. But there's a lot of veterans out there who remain. Rashna Singh, though, is an interesting case because a hard worker, the education minister, but also faced a recall bid from a group who were very concerned about sexual orientation. Well, I know, but they create a list. They create a list. They get a bunch
Yeah.
of names under
Yeah,
their
yeah,
belt and so forth. But Gary Begg, I think, is a solid performer for a long time. Mike Starchuk as well. Beltej Singh Dillon, as everybody's been saying, was a big recruit. So
yeah, he's great.
this and I hear good things about the candidates who've been recruited to replace Ralston and Baines, although I don't know them personally.
Yeah, I know
So-
Jesse Sunner a little bit. Like these are in some part lifelong New Democrats who, you know, as you know this, Jeff, you come up in the organization and then you get your opportunity and you know, the expectation they're well supported by the incumbents, and that's important in ridings like this.
So let's just finish out the suburbs here. You know, I'll just breeze through a few. Like I think if any riding is in contention of Burnaby, it's probably Burnaby North,
Sure.
which had been held by the BC Liberals for 16 years. BC United candidate is running for Conservatives there against Janet Rutledge. Coquitlam Burke Mountain, another seat that had gone BC Liberal more or less over the years. Those would be the two between Boundary Road and the Pitt River that I would single out as being in contention. Maple Ridge, where I'm from, there's been a bit historically as bellwether ridings, and Maple Ridge East tends to be more center right than Maple Ridge Pitt Meadows, but both went BC Liberal in 2013 and 2017. East was a bit close. They both lost, but East was a bit closer than Pitt Meadows. So I look at those with interest because the former mayor Maple Ridge is running for the Conservatives against Lisa Bear in the Pitt Meadows riding.
Yeah,
And
I've got a lot of thoughts on this one. This was
Yeah,
one I
okay,
put
let her rip.
I put this one in the 40s and I got text immediately being like, Richard, I'm not so sure. This
Yeah.
has a bit of blue feeling to it. And those ridings, if you described, have been a little bit of indicators, right? Litmus
Yeah.
tests for government. And they're unique, as you described, both separate, both with the name Maple Ridge. So the few different features here is Lisa Bear's riding, Maple Ridge Pitt Meadows, a little bit more urban. She pulled off, when you look back to 2013 into 17,
I don't know if it's a
this
little
was
more
a big
urban actually.
shift.
But
This was a big shift.
Yeah.
So that 17 victory for them in Maple Ridge was huge. And Mike Morden got annihilated during the municipal election 2 years ago. And how it's been described to me as in essence, he's been in hiding. So I'm very curious
Oh, I don't know
about
about
how
that.
people react to Mike Morden. Well, let's see. He got annihilated at the ballot box, Mike, and people did not like Mike Morden. There was a growing frustration with
Yeah,
him
he
in Maple
lost. There's no
Ridge.
doubt about it.
He lost badly, and there was a growing frustration from people there with him. But that conservative movement can sweep through. Maple Ridge Mission or Maple Ridge East, one of the things that's creeping in is people there access the Mission Hospital. And there's a lot of frustration around the Mission Hospital. And I think we'll talk about Abbotsford Mission in a minute. But that creeps into the dialogue there is, can I have access to healthcare? And Bob Deeth hasn't stepped up into cabinet yet. He's just been around and he's done good work as a backbencher, sure. But people in that community may be wondering, okay, how can I ensure better representation around the cabinet table? And that's one of the ones that's shifting in my mind, is becoming more interesting, more relevant, and could be one of the ones that defines that count to 47, that majority government. Maybe this is the one the Conservatives need to form that majority.
Okay, well, just you brought up Maple Ridge mayoralty results since it's
Okay, so how much
since
do
I
you
was
lose
born
by?
there. Since I was born there, I at least Googled it. It was 43% to 30%, so I wouldn't call it
For an
annihilation.
incumbent, losing by 13 points, Mike, is not good.
Well, you have high standards, boy. I
For
tell ya.
incumbents, I do.
For annihilation.
For
Well, I'd just
incumbents,
like
I
to
have high standards.
Cast back quickly
Okay,
though.
fair enough.
When we went by awfully fast on the Coquitlam ones. In Coquitlam Burke Mountain, we've got Jody Wickens, who won a by-election in the pre-Oregon term.
Yeah.
Couldn't get across the line in 2017. She's very, very talented. She's running to replace Finn Donnelly. I think she'll be good. I hope she is successful. In Millardville, where Celia Robinson was the MLA, I'm hearing there's still some discontent in the Riding Association about that. So we'll see how. I'm not sure the name of the candidate there, but that one may be a bit harder for the NDP than we thought.
Yeah, Jennifer
Yeah.
Blatherwick's the candidate there. And
Right.
yeah, there is a sense, but they have also got the support of the BC United candidate there. But yeah, it's right to flag. And, but when you ask Selena Robinson, she tells you all the frustration she has. And then you ask her, who are you going to vote for? She says the NDP. So we'll see. We'll see what she's telling people in the community.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just hop across the Golden Ears Bridge and head to Langley. I think there's a perception the Conservatives will do quite well in the Fraser Valley. Certainly in Abbotsford, Chilliwack, probably where we'll start, despite there being NDP MLAs out there. Conservative votes, if they're over 40%, the vote's got to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And they're going to go in the Fraser Valley, probably where they're very strong on a federal level. Now, when you look at those three Langley ridings, so I think I would single out, I think it's Langley, Willowbrook as one where it will be tougher for the Conservatives to win that seat.
So I think
because it's the city of Langley, right? Isn't
yeah,
that one?
and that's the firewall.
Yeah.
That is the wave is coming through the Fraser
Yeah.
Valley. It's sweeping
Yeah.
through Chilliwack, Abbotsford. It's clicking off incumbents. And then does Andrew Mercier stand tall in Langley, Willowbrook, which is a very similar riding demographically to Surrey, Cloverdale. It is the core of Langley. It is suburban, young families, has historically been BC Liberal with Mary Polak. Mercier pulled off that upset, beating the incumbent in 2020. And does it hold strong there and stop that conservative wave and stop before it sweeps through Surrey? And as we described, the demos in Surrey are different, but if I were to pick three ridings that are the most important, Langley Willowbrook is one of those three, because not just is it an incumbency riding for a minister, but it's this larger reflection of, are these NDP gains from John Horgan real? Are the demographic shifts real? Do the NDP speak now for the suburban voters in places they historically have not been able to win? All of those questions will be answered with the result of that riding. Because you look at the ones around it, some of those ones are ones that if you took the fringe Conservatives plus BC Liberal last time around, combined, they would have won.
Yeah.
Those seats are hard for the NDP incumbents. So that includes Kelly Patton, Megan Dykman, Dan Coulter, Pam Alexis, both ministers. They had a very unique situation last time around with the popularity of Horgan, that they were able to ride that to first-time victories for them. In Chilliwack's case, yes, they'd won the by-election, but hadn't won in a general. And so those are going to be the ones that are going to be hard for the NDP to hold on to, but there's a confidence that Mercier's, yeah, sure. If everything goes right for David Eby in the campaign and they can spark that same energy that John Horgan did during a pandemic election, sure. But I think that's unrealistic, and they're going to lose some seats. Incumbents are going to lose, but where does that line stop? And that's why Willowbrook is so interesting, because of the demos and really because of geographically where it is too. It's a great visual representation. As we talk on election night, you can see on those maps the colors changing as you work your way towards Metro Vancouver, towards the Fraser, and that visualization of when will the orange wall hold strong. And this could be the place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but it's interesting that the NDP is a permanent factor there now because of demographic changes, which wasn't the case earlier in my lifetime. Gwen O'Mahony, now running for the Conservatives in Nanaimo, won a by-election in Chilliwack, which was quite an upset to the ruling party at the time, because this was considered, impossible.
I remember.
Yeah. So there you go with a number of seats there. I think the question really is.
I haven't been back to Cultus Lake since, Richard.
But it's a question of whether the voters also respond to the conservative approach, which is, very much a work in progress on a whole bunch of fronts. And I think, the NDP proposition is pretty straightforward and has a lot to say to people like that, whether they are more responsive to a question about carbon tax or, reviewing all the textbooks and some of the other things that John Russ says are going to be important to do right away. We'll see.
Yeah,
that's very important.
I mean, it is fascinating how, especially in the suburbs, the voters, that collective mood that kind of descends down upon voters sometimes, or up from them. And, and I think, Richard, your newscast, Global, is probably more impactful in the suburbs of Metro Vancouver than anywhere else. Because I think you got people that are, turning on the morning news while they're getting ready for work, or they're coming back at the end of a long day, and they're not necessarily thinking about politics all day long, but they're pulling their news wherever they can get it, talking to their neighbors, and sometimes collectively they move, right?
I meet more people, Mike, when I'm in Metro Vancouver from Langley than anywhere else. We went on a
Yeah.
family holiday to Mexico a few years ago. Dozens of people came up to me, and almost universally they were from Langley. You get this feeling that this is where people watch the news. We know people watch in the city of Vancouver.
Yeah.
We know our audiences are growing in Surrey,
Yeah.
but like you described it, it's that ebbs and flows of the daily news cycle, that they're not tuning in every day to CKNW, or they're not listening to the podcasts, but they like to focus in from like maybe all the way from 6 to 7, especially those that love Squire, but sometimes those that focus in on the first 15 minutes and get a sample of what is happening in our province. And that's going to make, the coverage matter in ridings like that.
Yeah.
And so when David Eby has those opportunities to do events, those short snippets, what people see through my eyes and through Keith Baldry's eyes, ends up mattering a lot in those ridings.
Yeah. Okay, let's take the ferry over to the island here and finish it off. Let's just start in North Island.
Oh, this is going to be
work our way down. Now, North
Sure.
Island, what I find interesting, let's package North Island and Courtney Comox together here.
Sure.
They're both within the same federal riding, basically, which is Aaron Gunn is the federal Conservative candidate who famously was evicted from the BC Liberal leadership race in 2021. Picked up his marbles and took them over to the BC Conservative Party, and has been a very influential organizer with the BC Conservatives. And both these ridings, I would think, are targets for the Conservatives to win, especially Courtney Comox, which demographically and the boundaries are very generous to the center right. What's your take?
Has Courtney Comox been important in a BC election before, Mike? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
So you'll remember.
Yeah, this is
in
where
2017.
This is where
I
we
stayed
refer
up
to fucking
with my
Don
friend
McCrae.
Geoff Meggs
Fucking
until
Don
1
McCrae.
o'clock. My friend Jeff and I until 1 o'clock in the morning on CBC, and we discussed the riding of Courtney Comox, which came down. If Don McCrae had run again, Christy Clark may still be the premier of British Columbia.
Way to
Mike.
go, Don.
She may have been the longest serving premier in history, if not for Don McCrae. It was the closest riding.
Effing Don McCrae.
It was an incredible race. So we've seen it there before. Ronald Ray Leonard's running again. So people can.
But that was a vote split in that.
It was
that
a vote
campaign in
split, and
27. The Conservative
split's gone,
got like
right?
2,000 votes or something, right?
So the split's gone. And so
Well, and the
Brennan
Greens
Day,
got a lot of votes too the first time.
Yeah, and
they
they
made a
but-
big scene of it about
but
it.
they were down. So we know it's interesting. So let me talk about North Island, which hasn't been interesting provincially for a while, because this is now one that they've got their eyes on. Anna Kindy is the Conservative candidate. She has been an organizer in the trucker convoy. She's donated to the trucker convoy. This part of the Conservative Party is going to be part of the conversation during the debate.
She's a doctor, I believe. Right?
It resonates with people there in that community, right? When we saw rallies at the legislature in Victoria, these weren't people that were coming from James Bay to the rallies. These are people that were coming from Campbell River down to Victoria. So it's going to be, it was a big win by the NDP the last few election cycles, but in a change election, those margins, some ridings, you just have to throw the margins out the door and say, the vibe is different this time around. Michelle Babchuk knows she's got a challenge on her hands here. And it's going to be one of the really fun ones, and expect to see the leaders pay a visit there. And the green influence there, as Geoff mentioned, is going to matter too.
Well, North Island, I don't think the Greens are so big. Comox, Courtney. But let me say a word for my friend Michelle Babchuk. She really has a great connection to working people in that riding, and has not been deflected from supporting people in logging, supporting people in fish farming and that kind of thing, the way Claire Trevina might have been as her predecessor. Sure. So I think if we've got a challenge there from the Conservatives, we couldn't do better than Michelle Babchuk to represent us, especially as an incumbent and a former, I can't remember, I think she was a councillor in Campbell River.
Yeah, or district,
I agree with you. I think
municipal representative for sure.
She's a really strong candidate in MLA, but it may be arguably increasingly a rarity in the NDP in terms of someone who hails from the resource industry background, right? And so she'll need help from her party to fend off the Conservatives. There's only so much she can do herself.
Yeah.
So let's look at, you brought it up earlier, Geoff, Nanaimo North Landsville. This area typically was BC Liberal back in the day, because it usually was part of the Parksville Qualicum, elements of the Nanaimo part of Parksville Qualicum. Nanaimo was a real north-south dynamic. Like the further south you go, it's more NDP. The further north you
Yeah.
go, it's not NDP. But
Depends
this
how close
time,
you are to the Costco, right, Mike?
that's right. But this time you've got the former NDP MLA from Chilliwack running for the Conservatives in Nanaimo versus George Anderson, who is a young lawyer, former city councillor, and chair of the university, who's running for the NDP. So it's an interesting matchup. And in recent weeks, Gwen Omani was in front of the crack pipe dispensing machine at the hospital, making lots of hay out of that. And there's been a lot of crime issues in Nanaimo, and Mayor Krogh has, been pounding his fist on the desk trying to get some action on that. To me, this is one of those seats that Conservatives need to win if they're going to win government.
I agree, and I think on my list now it's somewhere in the top 8, and it keeps moving around because we talked earlier about how weird the boundary changes have been with Parksville Oceanside, and this has been one of the ones that was carved out in all of that. So it's unclear where the demos lie, but it does feel a lot like that old Parksville Qualicum riding. And George Anderson has been expressing to people he's feeling some pressure at the doorstep, and it's going to be a bit of a grind. Doesn't have the advantage of incumbency. He is one of the rare federal liberals that's on the ballot for the NDP. Those federal liberals are looking for homes, and this may be a guy who ends up getting some volunteers, his old friends who, worked with him around federal liberal campaigns, who may decide to pop over and provide some assistance in that riding. And that stuff matters when you're talking about a few hundred votes that could determine a race. So yeah, it's these ones are so interesting to me around, where can they break through, especially because the electoral maps are a little bit unclear based on, historic data.
Sorry, Mike, I was in Nanaimo on the weekend, and there's activity everywhere, and it shows the problems and challenges faced by the NDP, because I heard Leonard Krogh on the radio. Leonard, of course, longtime New Democrat, but he's never been shy to criticize the government as the mayor of Nanaimo. He said they gave us 1,000 housing units and it's not enough. Well, 1,000 housing units is not a small investment in the city of Nanaimo, and you can see it from downtown. There's places going up all over the place. How many of them are government? How many are private? I don't know. Same with hospital investments and the massive hospital that's being built in Duncan. So you can go down a long list of current concerns of people there and show a real action. But as you guys say, it may be difficult given some of the sentiment there on this stuff that people say, well, what did you do for me today?
Yeah, just generally on the island, and I lived near the Nanaimo area for about 15 years, and it's been obviously been very strong NDP turf provincially, but the common thread is that they're protest voters. And they're not, not afraid to vote federal reform back in the day in the 90s. But when Harper and the Conservatives became a little more establishment, they moved away from that. I think the point I want to make is I think the BC Conservatives have a greater opportunity north of Victoria than the BC Liberals did, because they are outsiders, because they're not big business from Vancouver, and the business community party, which the BC Liberals very much resembled, right? These guys are coming out of the hills to take over the province potentially, and I think if the sub-region like Northern Vancouver Island is an area where they might see that opportunity.
This has been a Mike McDonald philosophy for a long time. I remember you and I having a conversation a decade ago about this idea that there could be a breakthrough in Nanaimo for the BC Liberals. We are there. It was like this singular obsession of yours. I remember talking about it in 2017. We got Paris Gaudette. We got a good candidate. This is the time.
I was just spinning you at that point.
No, I don't. There's this point of pride for Mike McDonald that one day the center-right party will win Nanaimo. Like, this is like,
well, they have won Nanaimo, that Parksville Qualicum riding.
No, but the Nanaimo Gabriola now. Nanaimo.
I'm not suggesting Nanaimo Gabriola is going to go anything but NDP.
You were at one point feeling that this was the grand prize. The grand prize was Nanaimo.
This is you're getting getting very, very excited with yourself here. Okay, let's move
I
on.
remember the platform for Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
It was
Just
comprehensive.
to
Well,
win
okay.
Nanaimo, Jeff.
Well, since you want to tease me, I do remember in 1996, right after the Bingo Gate scandal, and we had the mayor of Nanaimo running as the BC Liberal candidate against Dale Lovick, maybe. And I was thinking, like, yeah, we got a great chance in Nanaimo because the Bingo Gate scandal, we got hammered. And it's just like, that's where it's like, it's in their nature, right?
Yeah.
But
But just to
anyways,
pause there, the by-election in Nanaimo where Sheila Malcolmson was successful
Yeah.
against the Green Party, in retrospect, in my view, was a turning point in the Horgan
yeah,
period, because it settled the issue of whether or not the Greens would continue to grow.
Yeah.
And so Gabriel is safe, and Sheila's done a ton of work there. It will be very interesting to see if they're able, what the upshot is in the other riding, which has changed hands a few times.
yeah. I mean, it's the design of Nanaimo North Landsville is the design I would have wanted if I was advising on the redistribution for a center-right party. That's the riding I would want to compete in, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's look at Saanich North and the Islands. This is a riding that was non-NDP from 1991 until actually even before that, but in the BC Liberal era was BC Liberal from 1991 to 2013. Then had one-term bare NDP victory in 2013. There was a three-way race with all of them separated by a few hundred votes, including Adam Olsen. And then Adam wins it. And he won it twice, and now he's not running again. Overlaid with Elizabeth May's federal riding, which is an anomaly, right? I think this has got to be one where the Conservatives are thinking they got a shot.
I think they all think they've got a shot.
Yeah.
And we've seen that before. This is a really interesting riding because, you would have described if Adam Olsen's running again, this is a safe riding. And it's rare that one candidate swings the perception so much. Rob Botterill is known in the riding, but he's on Pender, which is the smaller of the Gulf Islands. So, that vote on Salt Spring is going to be crucial. David Bush
Pender is a
target...
political powerhouse. I just want to add,
for sure.
Yeah.
Pender Island.
That's the new Mike
What's in the
McDonald
water there,
thing
Jeff?
here.
Jeez.
Bellwether poll for sure.
Yeah, and you have David Bush, and you'll remember this is the Gary Lund federal seat, right?
Yeah,
Before Elizabeth May, the Conservatives have had success in this region, and it's going to be curious to see how he resonates there. And Sarah Riddell was just nominated as the NDP candidate, a councillor in Central Saanich. So you sort of split the riding up a bit. So, Sarah Riddell does well in Central Saanich. David Bush does well in the senior population, more conservative in Sydney. Rob Botterill does well on Pender. And, as goes Salt Spring goes the riding, I guess. And it's an interesting dynamic there because Salt Spring's got a whole lot of things going on there, obviously, libertarian sense, and narrowing people in on a political party in that area is fascinating. So yeah, for sure, the Conservatives have their eye on this. The Greens need to keep it. Like, we're sort of running out of time because I got to run to an event. This philosophy around, could the Greens be wiped off the electoral map?
It's a real
having
question.
had success in 13, 17,
let's
and
end
20.
it right here on Victoria
this
Beacon
could be
Hill.
Well, we didn't even get to my most important riding in the province. So we'll finish on Beacon Hill and then I'll talk about that one because we sort of...
You can toast that in the minibar.
Okay, let's do that.
Beacon Hill, leader of the Green Party, Grace Laura NDP, and a Conservative candidate, Tim Tillman, who's a lawyer who's been making some noise.
Especially if you spend time on social media.
Yeah. What's your take?
Yeah, so I've thought a lot about this riding. So Sonia Firstnow's back there, and we'll have a profile about her on Thursday on Global. She's moved from Shawnigan back to Victoria. She has lots of roots in the community, but this is a riding. Again, Carol James owned this place. There's a lot of public servants that live there, and public servants don't love disruption. And I wonder if that creeps into their head to say, we'd like some stability here. Let's vote for the New Democrat in Grace Laura. Grace Laura owns the neighborhood of Fernwood. It's where she lives. James Bay is going to be a curious conversation between the Greens and the NDP. And then we open up into Fairfield, and that's really where it's going to be decided. And that's where these retired professors live. This is where the public servants live. This is where Global BC's bureau chief Keith Baldry lives. It's an informed electorate in Fairfield, and it's going to be fascinating. A high-profile minister in Grace Laura, young, speaks to the new demos of the NDP up against the leader, and then Tim Tillman, who's got lots of sort of support around him. He's done some well-organized rallies. How he breaks through, it's going to be curious. The Conservatives have surprisingly got a good slate of candidates in southern Vancouver Island now. John Wilson, owner of Wilson Transportation, running next door in Esquimalt. Former mayoral candidate and journalist Stephen Andrew running next door in Oak Bay. The Conservatives are starting to gain some momentum in the South Island, and it makes the riding really, really interesting.
Okay. That was a fantastic tour of the province, Richard and Geoff. We're going to finish this up in the minibar.
Hydrogen. We're hearing more and more about it all the time. Last time I spoke about the early days of British Columbia's gas energy system going back to the 1860s. I also spoke about how our sponsor, FortisBC, is looking at new ways to move our energy system forward by working with farmers, local governments, industry, and Indigenous partners to develop renewable, low-carbon and gas projects right here in BC and elsewhere. Now, what does that look like in practice? Earlier this summer, FortisBC announced a funding agreement to support the development of hydrogen technology that would see zero-emission hydrogen and solid carbon being produced from natural gas at a low cost. FortisBC, through its Clean Growth Innovation Fund, is providing funding to VulcanX for the development of its proprietary technology. VulcanX is a company that was spun out from Merida Labs at the University of British Columbia and has developed the technology to separate natural gas into its components of hydrogen and solid carbon. That's way above my pay grade. Funds from FortisBC will be used to support the front-end engineering and detailed design of a potential facility capable of producing up to 1 ton of hydrogen per day. Now, why is FortisBC making this investment? Amendments to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction, Clean Energy Regulation empower utilities like FortisBC to help establish and grow the hydrogen sector in BC. Through the regulation, FortisBC can directly invest in hydrogen production as well as distributing it as an energy source. FortisBC believes that hydrogen has the potential to play a significant role in the lower carbon energy future that can help meet the energy needs of British Columbians while supporting the goals of the province's Clean BC strategy. FortisBC, energy for a better BC, and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Okay, I'll raise a
Okay.
glass quickly.
You're going to raise it now. Are you going to raise a glass to your favorite riding contest here, Geoff? Wow. Are you going to?
No, I was going to
Okay.
raise it. I'm going to send my best wishes to people who are east of what Richard described as the wall. You know, in those because you know I've been I've run for office and I've had to come from behind, and it's a very, very difficult process because you physically feel the resistance, if I can put it that way. It's a visceral, personal experience. So that's the tough road that's lying ahead of some really good people like Dan Coulter or Pam Alexis, Kelly Padden, Megan Dykman. Good people. They've put their name forward on a number of occasions at various levels, and they're going to have the fight of their lives ahead of them. And I wish them all the best. It's a tough road to hoe, but definitely, as we were saying earlier, and I agree with Richard, those are battleground places. And if they can hang on to them, that's good news for David Eby.
Okay, Richard, what's your raise a
All right, I
glass?
raise my glass to the people of Richmond, Queensborough, which I believe is the most interesting riding in British
Oh,
Columbia.
interesting. Wow.
Aman Singh snuck by my friend and colleague Jazz Johal last time around. Queensborough is this classic mix with New West and Richmond. It is going to be the riding to watch in this province.
Wow.
It is going to be potentially riding 47, that difference between a Conservative government or an NDP government. That is going to be a battleground. My glass is highly raised to my friends in Richmond, Queensborough, who will have a big decision on their hands in that riding.
Good call. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to raise a glass. This is a bit of a cop out, but I'm going to raise a glass to, first of all, I'm going to take a shot at Ladysmith Oceanside seat, stupid seat in the province. But I'm gonna raise a glass to Elections BC. They got a really tough job in the next month here to police all of this. It's gonna be super complicated, and we take for granted how well our elections do usually get undertaken. So I look forward to a smooth process, and I'd like to thank you, Richard, for spending a very busy week for you, UBCM, taking time to
Of course.
talk to our listeners about this.
And go vote. If you live in British Columbia, go vote.
and
Yeah.
go vote. I'd like to thank our guest, Richard Zussman, for a fascinating tour of the election landscape. And we look forward on Monday to starting our daily podcast at Hotel Pacifico throughout the 2024 BC election. As Kate says, BC, you can never leave, and you certainly can't leave now.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.